Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the third edition of Facebook Live with me, Nigel Farage. It's Tuesday morning. I hope you all had as good a Easter as you possibly could have done. Although, I think it's been a pretty anxious time for a lot of people. People are anxious about their businesses, anxious about their income, and anxious about their friends and family. We're told that perhaps 1 in 7 households now has coronavirus or has had coronavirus, and we certainly saw it affect my family over the weekend with one of my close family members who's been pretty unwell for a few days. Not hospitalized, I'm pleased to say, but pretty unwell. So I think, a lot of, anxious people over this Easter weekend. Well, it's Tuesday morning, it's a new week, the sun's out, but it's not warm enough to put on shorts today. All right, no, it really, really isn't. In fact, I was out this morning in the fields seeing the newborn lambs, and it was decidedly chilly. Now, the good news over the weekend, and I think it cheered up pretty much all of us, is that Boris Johnson came out of hospital. Clearly, he was very ill last week. I thought it was very interesting to see Trevor Kavanagh in The Sun saying that he'd actually written an obituary of Boris, which might have had to appear in the newspaper, and he'd never been so pleased to have an article he'd written be spiked. So we're very pleased that Boris is out of hospital. He's at Chequers. We're told he had a walk around the garden yesterday, but clearly he is not going to be involved directly in day-to-day decisions for a bit. You could argue, I guess, that perhaps not taking the virus seriously enough to begin with is one of the reasons he became as ill as he did. Now, he praised the National Health Service, and I want to praise all of those very brave people doing their job on the front line and without the correct PPE, in many cases taking huge risks. That also applies, of course, to the care home sector. Care home catastrophe is the Daily Mail headline today. And of course, the death figures that we get every day are just those that have died in hospital. We really don't know how many people have died of coronavirus in care homes or indeed in their own homes. And whilst it's absolutely right for Boris Johnson to praise those people in the NHS who helped him, goodness me, I know all about that. Twice I have been a serious emergency. Once after being hit by a car, another time after being in a plane crash. Yeah, I've lived a bit. I was wheeled in to Banbury Hospital after the plane crash, and it was like a scene out of a film. There were like a dozen people waiting for me, and you all whizzed through scans, and there were people stitching you up, and there was even a Dutch nurse who sort of held my hand through it all, and that's amazing. But what we can't allow is for there to be no criticism of the National Health Service itself, certainly Public Health England as well, because much of this PPE mess up, and yes, sure, the government have not engaged the private sector as actively as they should have done. Once again, we see a ridiculous over-reliance on China, who send us all this kit, and of course half of it doesn't actually work. Anyone who's bought anything that's got made on China on it knows that mostly it's rubbish anyway. But also massive distribution problems that have occurred. So yes, we want to praise nurses, doctors, all of those working within both the National Health Service and the care home community. But we cannot allow ourselves to be in a place where there's no criticism of the way in which at times we spend our money or services are provided. In fact, you think sometimes, listening to it, that we were the only country in the world that even had a health system. Now, I'm going to make you a prediction, because as with everything in this crisis, the UK government follows everybody else as opposed to leading. So it was with lockdown, other countries locking down before we did. And this morning, we're seeing easings in Denmark, minor easings in Spain and Italy, a fairly significant easing taking place in Austria. And of course, Sweden, where, well, you can't say life has carried on as normal, but to some degree it has. So we will follow the others out of lockdown, but it's going to be at least 3 more weeks. There's no way that Dominic Raab is going to make that decision without the boss, Boris, being at the helm. Talking of Dominic Raab, those 5 p.m. press briefings, I mean, they're almost unwatchable. Raab or someone stands up, or Hancock, even worse, and tells you that everything's going swimmingly, there's nothing to worry about, they're almost not worth watching. But my prediction is this on face masks. Now, I'm not a doctor, I don't know, but it seemed to me from the start, what's the downside of wearing face masks? Surely, at the very minimum, if they don't protect you as an individual, they protect others, surely, whether it's coronavirus or the common cold or whatever else it may be. The World Health Organization, who, almost unbelievably think that the wet markets in Wuhan and elsewhere should be allowed to reopen, provided there are better sanitary conditions. I suppose he who pays the piper calls the tune, and China seem to be rather good at giving them money. But the World Health Organization yesterday, I thought David Nabarro, British representative there, said something quite intelligent. He said, we're going to have to get used to face masks. They're going to become a reality, part of our way of life. And we've seen the American administration change their view on face masks. In India, in Mumbai, for argument's sake, face masks are mandatory. If you don't wear one, it's 6 months in prison. Now, I don't approve of that. In Spain, there are 10 million fairly high quality face masks now being given out by the government to people travelling or in public spaces. And Austria, the one that is easing lockdown in the most significant way, they've now made it mandatory to wear a face mask. And I predict that we will all be made to wear face masks, and it'll come as part of our gradual easing, although I don't expect to see any of that until early May, which is a problem, because if you thought Dominic Raab was wooden, if you thought Matt Hancock wasn't up to scratch, I think the one that takes the prize for sheer incompetence and uselessness is the Business Secretary, Alok Sharma, who, having championed what looked like a great idea from Rishi Sunak about the business loan scheme, then appeared again at the weekend on our national screens, and he's had to confirm that of the 300,000 applications there have been for business loans, only 4,200 have been processed. That is 1.4%, and in total money, that is about £800 million. Why is it everybody else is doing this better than us? In Germany alone last week, they processed 125,000 loans. And here's the really stunning fact. In the United States of America, $200 billion of loans have already been taken up of a provisional $350 million. And Trump is going to go back to Congress and try and increase that even more. So the American loan scheme has lent over 200 times as much money to American business as we have. Oh, and by the way, you've heard the stories about British businessmen looking for loans to be told it'll be 23% interest. In the United States of America, it's all at way under 2%. So America is doing it better than us. Germany is doing it infinitely better than us. And my fear is that when economies do start to move again, we are going to be behind the curve. One quick personal note from me, Easter Sunday. By the way, I've never had a barbecue on Easter Sunday. It really was a lovely day. The shorts were on that day for certain. But it was the first anniversary of me being in a metal bashing factory just off the M6 in Coventry, and it was the launch of the Brexit Party 1 year ago. I want to say thank you to the hundreds of thousands of people who donated money to us through the website, to the over 5 million of you who went out and voted for a party that had not existed for even a full 6 weeks. We changed the agenda. If it hadn't been for the Brexit Party, not only would we be going through this horrible crisis, we would still be in the EU. But the job is not completely finished. And I've noticed one or two in the Eurosceptic community saying, oh, well, because of the crisis, let's just accept that it's going to be delayed. No, we mustn't accept that it's going to be delayed. We need to be absolutely free to chart our own way out of this, and no part of the European Investment Bank and no liability if the Eurozone collapses. And I think that it will. Some big political change happening already. I've had several conversations with Italians this week. The mood now in Italy to leave the European Union is growing very, very quickly. And I've said to Italian friends, if I can help them with that, I most certainly will. Right, your questions. Right, and by the way, please, we've had great numbers so far on this, but please do share this video. Right, let's go. Brad says, Nigel, do you know about the UK's cancer patients being told they cannot have treatment because COVID-19 is more important? Brad, the two biggest causes of death in this country are heart disease and cancer. And one of the costs of this crisis that has not yet fully been assessed is how many people will die of other illnesses, of other diseases, because of a lack of available treatment in the National Health Service. Now, clearly, the building of the Nightingale hospitals, which I think has been one of the huge success stories over the course of the last few weeks, incidentally, isn't it interesting? You put the British Army in with somebody from private business, they make things happen. So yeah, a lot of operations, a lot of others are being neglected. I'm pleased to see quite a big deal has been done between the private health group Rutherford and the National Health Service. And indeed, I spoke to Dr. Carol Sikora, cancer expert, on my LBC show on Sunday. And he said two very interesting things. First thing he said was that, in fact, a big deal has been done and a huge number of cancer patients will now be outsourced from the National Health Service to the private sector. That makes absolute sense to me. Secondly, his view, maybe right, maybe wrong, but his view was that we are now at the peak of the infection. But that wasn't the view of Dominic Raab's advisors yesterday. So there is some positive work going on. Chrissy says, my question is, why is the government not securing our borders? Chrissy, I have been railing about this ever since this crisis started. I am struck that those countries that have done best are the countries that closed their borders to international flights, tested, traced those who had coronavirus or had been near to coronavirus, and that is why you see so many countries in the world that have handled this and done better than us. And it is astonishing, even though the number of commercial flights, of course, is massively down, it is astonishing. And for example, a friend of mine last week, her daughter flew back from the Far East, got to Heathrow, not even temperature tested, let alone demanded they went into a period of quarantine. So we've handled this appallingly. I'm convinced that in the big post-mortem that's to come, we will see that actually opening up the doors to flights is what led to so much of this problem in our country. By the way, while I'm on this, something that is not even getting into the news agenda is what was happening this weekend in the English Channel. Light winds, calm seas, and migrant boats coming. Some landing in Hastings, some landing near Rye, others up in Dover. Most of the ones near Dover, of course, they get a few miles out of Calais, and then what happens is the UK Border Force escorts them in. And none of them are put into quarantine, none of them are tested. I mean, you can't believe it, given that the camps they're coming from, we know now do have a COVID-19 problem. So bad was it in Dover on Saturday that in one of the boats, there were two people who were ill, really quite ill, showing classic signs of having coronavirus. And in fact, half the port had to be closed down and sort of hosed down. And none of this even makes the news. So I'm not allowed, even on my own, to go out fishing. Well, I might be half a mile away from the nearest person. That's against the law. But if you want to come in illegally on a boat from Calais, it's come on down. I just can't believe the media are not covering this story. David says, why is testing so slow in this country compared to Germany and others? David, because they're efficient, they're well run, they've engaged the private sector. They also perhaps had a degree of preparedness for a pandemic that we didn't. Now, we know that there was, a sort of dummy test run done in the National Health Service back in 2016. It showed we were in a very, very poor state to deal with the pandemic, and yet nothing happened. I also have to raise Matt Hancock. I mean, how these people get to these positions, completely beyond me. But Hancock and Boris told us we'd be doing 25,000 tests a day. When that wasn't met and there was an outcry, Hancock did a press conference first week of this month and said, it's okay, guys, because by the end of the month, we'll be testing 100,000 people a day. That, by the way, is the antigen test to see whether you've got it, as opposed to the antibody test to see whether you've had it. And he gave this speech, and suddenly all the criticism, all the anger dissipated. In fact, The Guardian said, thank goodness for Matt Hancock, somebody really in charge of this. Well, we're now in the middle of April. We're barely scratching 20,000 a day. And if we don't get to 100,000 by the end of the month, then Hancock has to go. Pam says, what has surprised you since you've been in lockdown about your lifestyle or outlook on life, positively and or negatively? Positively, I've never been as aware of the world around me as I am right now. I've watched, all the way through. I've watched the bluebells come up, and they're now at their peak. We could do with some rain, actually, because the scent in a bluebell wood when they're in full flower after it's rained is quite something. I'm now watching the cowslips just beginning to emerge in the fields. I've seen things like tree creepers that I hadn't seen for years. I listen to the woodpecker first thing after I get up. And in the road outside, there's so little traffic, it really is back to being a country lane like it might have been 60, 70, 80 years ago. So that side of things I've enjoyed. On the negative side, well, look, we are social animals. And yeah, I miss going to the pub, I miss the banter, I miss some of that fun. And there's a lot we can do with video conferencing and everything else, but it's not the same as actually meeting people. Bruce asks me, why are people who die of cancer, pneumonia, heart attacks, and many other conditions being classed as having died from COVID-19? Bruce, this is very difficult, isn't it? Is it the symptoms of COVID-19 that are killing some of these people, or would they have died anyway? Casualty numbers are always difficult in times of peace and war. What we did see last week was that COVID-19 was the main killer in the country, above heart disease and cancer. They were very, very closely second and third behind. Bruce, I would answer that question differently and say, how many more people have died in care homes over the course of the last few weeks that aren't yet even in the figures? But this stuff's not easy because, 11,000 people a week die in the UK anyway. It's a big figure, but it's true. Jackie says, did I hear correctly that you have a family member with COVID-19? If so, best wishes to them. Jackie, thank you, I do. I'm not going to say who it is, because otherwise the press will be all over it. I'd rather keep them guessing. But yeah, I think we're in day 6 now. And yeah, having a pretty miserable time with it. Those who say, oh, it's just flu. No, they're wrong. It's not. It is quite a bit worse than that. So it seems to me. Bobby says, why can't they open... Oh, yeah, absolutely. Why can't they open the recycling centres so people can get rid of their waste, especially garden waste? Well, Bobby, luckily, it hasn't rained, so the grass is barely growing. It's growing a little bit, but it's barely growing. We're due some rain this weekend. The grass will start growing like billio. But it isn't just garden waste, is it? I mean, in many parts of the country, they're taking basic household rubbish and food waste, but nothing else. Can you imagine, getting back to lifestyle, can you imagine how many bottles I've got piled up after nearly a month of being here? But that's all right, I've got room, there's no problem. What is happening is a massive increase in fly tipping. We're seeing it in some London boroughs. Fly tipping is up 70%. And if we get a couple more weeks of this, it'll go up even more. And of course, some unscrupulous people now knocking on doors saying they've got a license to deal with waste, and they'll take your waste away for 20 quid, and then they're just dumping it on the side of the road or in hedgerows. I do think that getting some of those recycling centres open, using, social distancing and everything else, I think it's becoming a bigger and bigger issue for lots and lots of people. Gary says, why are some parents allowing their teenagers to gather together? Gary, there's lots of bad parenting in this country. Some of it is the fault of irresponsible adults. Some of it, of course, is by circumstance. What if you're a single parent, a nurse? You're working all the hours God sends. It's quite difficult to control your teenagers in those circumstances. Kirk says, Nigel, you need to make a noise about all the new corona laws being passed. Why aren't you? You're letting all of our rights be taken away. Kirk, I've been ranting about it. I've been writing about it. I've been broadcasting about it on LBC and also on this podcast, on this live stream as well. Look, I think Nick Adderley, the police chief in Northants, people like that scare the life out of me. Licking his lips at the prospects of having roadblocks, of checking our shopping bags. Cambridgeshire police in Bar Hill, outside Cambridge on Saturday, patrolling what they deem to be the non-essential aisles of supermarkets to make sure we're not buying things inappropriately. I thought the lockdown was about social distancing to stop the spread of coronavirus. I didn't know it was about house arrest, and I'm pretty appalled by the way some senior policemen have acted. Aaron says, what music are you listening to in the lockdown? I'm not a huge music listener, but last night, one of my daughters was playing music, most of it unlistenable to. And for a laugh, and given that the pubs are closed, we did play Sham 69's 2 pints of lager and a packet of crisps, please. It's about a bloke at a bar trying to get an order in, and he can't. Oi, John, I'm getting a bit impatient here. 2 pints of lager and a packet of crisps, please. Maybe not a cultural high, because I do know that lots of people are tuning in to classical music, which they find very soothing indeed. But to be honest with you, my days are reading, going through all the press, on the phone, broadcasting, writing. I'm kind of doing what I normally do, and that means I've got radio on, television on the whole time. Have to say, I know you're going to say he would say that, wouldn't he? But actually, if you want real instant reaction to news about the Prime Minister's health or whatever it may be, I do think LBC and other talk radio stations have actually been more listenable to than being talked down to effectively by a lot of the cable channels in this country. Dean says, what's your best guess as to when we may get back to some form of normality? Weeks, months or days? Dean, we're going to be locked down, completely locked down, many weeks after a lot of our European neighbours. In some ways, I suppose, we've got the advantage of seeing how it works out in those countries. This big decision has to be taken by Thursday. As I said earlier, I don't see, without Boris at the helm, there's any other decision going to be taken than to extend for 3 weeks. I expect we will see easing in May. To what extent, I don't know. The big fear, of course, is that you get a second wave of infection once you've eased up. And maybe within 3 weeks, we'll see from Austria and other countries like that how it's working out in Europe. There's another fear, and I don't know the answer to this. I don't think anyone does. But the other fear is that this becomes one of those viruses that doesn't simply just die out and disappear. Think of the common cold virus. How many billions of dollars and pounds have been spent trying to find a cure for it without ever any success? And it could be this is something that keeps coming back. And in that context, when David Nabarro from the World Health Organization says we may have to get used to face masks and social distancing as a reality for perhaps an indefinite period, I fear he may be right. Remember, if you're enjoying this, you like getting your questions in, please do share this video with new people and let's keep building our audience, which already has been, I have to say, very, very good. What did you think of Trump's press conference last night? Could it have a significant impact on his re-election? Well, it was a classic Trump press conference. It's combative, it's confrontational. He accuses them, doesn't he, of fake news and all the rest of it. It's the way Trump does business. And if you are a Trump supporter, you think, great, he's standing up to mainstream media. If you're a Trump hater, it confirms why you didn't like him in the first place. Look, he is up against Joe Biden. The guy can barely string a sentence together. The number of people watching his first live stream was much lower than are watching this live stream now with me, sitting at home, and him running to be US president. There are always going to be those that don't like Donald Trump, don't like his style, find him a bit rich for their blood. But I tell you what, with already $200 billion being lent to American companies, with $1,200 being directly deposited in 80 million Americans' bank accounts this month, I have a feeling that when it comes to economic rebound, America and Germany will rebound much more quickly than we will, because I fear there's so little help for small business here, there's so little help for sole traders, that weeks more lockdown are going to mean hundreds of thousands of business bankruptcies. It is one of my great fears. Martine says, what about flights still coming into the UK? Martine, in a word, madness, but there we are. Harry says, it's my birthday today. Any suggestions to enjoy it in lockdown, Mr. Farage? Well, Harry, have a drink and talk to as many people as you can on the phone or on video link. It's difficult. It's difficult. It was my birthday a couple of weeks back. A lot of things we'd like to do that we can't simply do. Fen says, can I please get a shout out, Nigel? I'm still working and paying my taxes. Well done, you. I don't know what job you do, but well done, you. Newsrat says, what are your hobbies in isolation? Do you read? Yeah, I've nearly finished a book, actually, about a guy called Private Lynch, who came across with the Australians and fought right through the Western Front. And I'm reading that at this moment in time. Margarita says, last week we had shorts. This week, can we have a smoking jacket and a cravat? I've got some cravats upstairs. I haven't worn them for a very long time. I may well try and tie one the next time we do this, which would be probably towards the end of this week. I don't really have a smoking jacket. It's a terrible confession, isn't it? Mark says, you're looking well, Nigel. You need a large scotch in your hand. Don't worry, Mark. Not struggling on that score. Opened a bottle of port last night. People don't drink port anymore, do they? Opened a bottle of port. Absolutely delicious. And my final question of this edition, this third edition of Facebook Live, is from Stephen Moore. Nigel, so happy to be able to communicate with you like this on Facebook. Hope we can do more. Well, do you know what? If you're enjoying it, if I'm enjoying it, why not? Our next live Q&A will actually happen on the YouTube channel. So we've done a lot on Facebook. We'll have a go on the YouTube channel. So what you need to do is subscribe to my YouTube channel, and then you'll get the notification that I'm coming up and doing it. And the link will be there in the comment section of, if you're confused with that, the link will be there in the comment section of today's edition. Thank you. Have as good a day as you possibly can.
We will make America great again.